texted to me. This was texted to me by an activist who likes me to address certain topics. Texted without really any context, or maybe it was just too late for me and I don't remember what the context was. So I don't know where he lands after watching this, but he did. It's cold. Whenever it gets cold, I get a runny nose. I have like chronic runny nose since the pandemic started, and every time the weather changes. So like when it's hot in the day, I'm great. I'm completely clear the minute the temp starts dropping. Okay, so I was not asked per se, but texted this piece from somebody who likes me to cover topics, right? And I did watch it last night, but I was tired. I'm not going to screen record this whole thing because I just don't think I have enough space in my phone to actually do the whole thing. Plus, it's a bit boring, but I'll give you a little commentary on it. Other people have discussed this before, the fact that Brianna Greyjoy, or Joy Gray, or whatever her name is. So she is formerly like a communications director or something, for national communications director for the Bernie 2020 campaign. And she also was like hugely pushing people to do movement for the People's Party type activities after Bernie did suspend his campaign. Her thing is to just beat a dead horse on their failed strategy to force the vote. So she has for over a year now been trying to force the vote into every single conversation, which is why, for those of you who may have watched my commentary, my coverage of the Progressive Caucus meeting, where they had an emergency meeting with Ash Kalra to discuss why he pulled the bill. The fact that he's making the rounds on shows like this seem to show even more disingenuousness with what is happening in the background here. But also Brianna Greyjoy, she also is incredibly disingenuous because she's using this opportunity to try and force the vote. Again, push the failed messaging and strategy of the Movement for the People's Party. Now, like I said, she was something like the national director of communications for the Bernie 2020 campaign. So she fancies herself really good at this, which is interesting that she can't just give up on a messaging loss. I'm guessing that somehow in the background here, she might have been responsible for actually writing up the messaging behind that, because she really won't let it go. And, sometimes we write things that just don't work. Sometimes we come up with strategies that just don't work. I really don't understand her motivations and goals other than if she is purposely just trying to be disruptive for no real reason, which she might be.
All right, I'm very glad to have Assemblymember Ash Kalra from San Jose, California, in the virtual studio with me today. Welcome, Assemblymember.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So the issue on everybody's...
By the way, as a marketing professional myself, I actually find it hilarious that her key point of doing this interview was to, again, belabor her failure on Force the Vote. And she didn't even have the wherewithal to write a title for this video, where you could actually read the whole Force the Vote. It trails off, right? I mean, you could have abbreviated California and fit it in there, but wow. This is why you make the big bucks, Brianna. This is why you make the big bucks. Also, she named her channel Bad Faith. That is not unironic. Her actions have all been in bad faith. Let's go.
Mine right now is how we came so close to seemingly passing a statewide Medicare for All in California, a state where there are overwhelming Democratic majorities, and so there is none of this. Can we get Republicans on board? Are we going to be able to get even moderate Dems on board? It's a state that is one of the most progressive states in the country, a state that went overwhelming for Bernie Sanders, a state where Medicare for All is overwhelmingly popular. So help us.
Overwhelmingly, yeah. Okay, so she really wants. Everybody who actually volunteered for or worked on the Bernie campaign in California was actually shocked that we did not have a much larger win than we did. We faced a lot of disruption. We faced a lot of sabotage. And the overall feeling from everybody who volunteered for the campaign, from everybody who was staffing at the local levels, was we should have had a bigger turnout. We should have had a bigger spread. Something went wrong with the campaign. So, okay. This should be easy, right, Brianna? It should be really easy for us to get overwhelming support for Medicare for All. But we don't have anything stacked up against us, like a bunch of live streamers out there constantly tearing down everything that we do, right? We don't have. Oh no, you didn't help this situation along at all. The toxicity coming out of the live stream network and the paid trolls on social media that were harassing people all the time, that can't possibly affect the mood of Californians, right?
Understand what happened.
So a couple of things. Well, first of all, it was quite a journey over the last year to get the bill where it was. And it wasn't on the verge of passing the legislature. It was on the verge, at least brought to the assembly floor. So the House of Origin, where the bill was introduced, where I introduced it last year. And so last year in February, along with our sponsors, the California Nurse Association and a number of co-authors, I introduced AB 1400. And this is, 4 years prior, there was another effort in California that had gotten through the Senate and then stalled in the Assembly without a hearing. And so,
He's not really giving you a lot of background on that one, but that was SB 52, I think. I think it was called SB 52. And Anthony Rendon tabled it. He was the Speaker of the Assembly in 2017 when this happened. And there was a lot of protests, but to the point, this is another reason that a lot of progressives actually attack labor rather than utilizing labor for what it is, which is representation of the people. But there, with every organization, there can be corruption. And this is why they also highly, highly demonize Rusty Hicks as the party chair. And they keep conflating what politicians do versus what the party does into one big name, the DNC, right? Like everything boils down to the DNC, even though there are a lot of independent things working together. The politicians oftentimes go against what the party wants to do because the politicians have First Amendment free speech. They can claim themselves to be a Democrat and they can then say, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do that will get me elected because it matters to my district and that's what my district wants. When they say it matters to my district, what they're saying is it matters to the people who will actually help me get elected because your constituency is the people who helped you get elected. Anybody who did not help you get elected is a lower priority because in these politicians' minds, they didn't help me get elected, right? All right. So anyway, SB 52 was the previous bill. I believe it was SEIU had written a letter supporting Anthony Rendon's decision because there has been this labor argument that they spent years and years and years negotiating these healthcare contracts, and labor does have some pretty sweet deals on their contracts. And so their fear is that if we go into a universal Medicare for all single payer system, that might actually somewhat increase costs for the labor members. But I don't see that as being possible unless we're talking like the really high income earners, which most high income earners are not actually unionized, right? So I just don't see how the percentages would work out to support an argument like that. But that has been one of the biggest arguments against unifying the working class behind single payer, is that the labor unions have for years done a lot to negotiate healthcare contracts. But there are a lot of labor unions who fully support the idea of universal single payer Medicare for all style healthcare. And again, we end up with this group of very bitter progressives and hashtags who find fault with everything, and they're just constantly generalizing and grouping everybody together as though everybody believes the same thing.
With time passed, because there was a lot of wounds that needed to be healed from a few years ago, I introduced the bill, and it was starting to go through the process in the assembly. And what happened was a few years ago, one of the issues that the speaker, it's the same Speaker Rendon, one of the issues he had was that the policy bill was brought to the assembly and it didn't have any financing mechanism. There was no conversation about the constitutional issues that exist and what have you. So those conversations we began those conversations in earnest with the Speaker's office, with the nurses, all of us kind of in these internal meetings, just trying to say, okay, how do we get a path forward on this? And the result last year was that the Speaker indicated that, look, we actually did write up a financing mechanism. We wrote up and gave it to our legislative council, so it was in draft. Dealing with the constitutional issues, the Speaker essentially gave the option: hey, if you put that into AB 1400, this bill will be referred to a committee, to Revenue and Taxation Committee. The problem was twofold, and this is back in April. The problem then was twofold. One is now, because the financing was put into AB 1400, it made it a 2/3 vote instead of a majority vote. Secondly, because we only had a few days to present it before the committee, and the committee is a rather moderate committee, it was going to fail in the committee. I think that the sense that putting it before the committee on that short notice with the tax that was going to be over $100 billion, it was going to fail. And what we did was, I opted to not hold or to not have that bill hearing, and
he's burying you in details right now so that you won't question why he pulled this bill. You won't question the aspect that he's preserving relationships at this point. His reasoning behind pulling the bill did not make logical sense. A lot of people saw that, yet we had the board of the California Democratic Party Progressive Caucus defending him. We now have him on Brianna Greyjoy's show, also getting a platform to speak as long as possible. Consider how she's conducting this interview, and think about like other clips that you've seen of her in the past and how she does interrupt people and talk over people. So she's doing the exact same thing right here as Amr did at the Progressive Caucus meeting, which makes it look even more coordinated that we're getting gaslit over this. She's not interrupting him. She's giving him a softball interview. She's going to try and make it look like she's pushing back on him because she obviously was debriefed on what happened at the Progressive Caucus meeting and how people were asking to name names. But at the same time, she's not going to interrupt. She's going to let him tell his entire version of this story, because that is the point right now, is that the hashtag progressives, in quotation marks progressives, are giving this guy an apology tour for why he didn't just force the vote, if you will. They're allowing him the space to explain the failures that happened in California. They're allowing this without real pushback. Real pushback. This is not real pushback. What's happening here? This is a song and a dance, and it's to my mind, it just further discredits everybody involved. The fact that they're giving him the space to do this, and the fact that he is doing this, it all looks incredibly contrived, in my opinion.
Continue to have conversations with the Speaker's office. I asked him, would you keep an open mind to have two separate bills? He said he would. At that time, the nurses did condemn me for not putting it forward to committee, but AB 1400 would have died last April if we had done that. And what happened in the ensuing months, working with the nurses, working with the Speaker's office, I went to DC, met with the Department of Health and Human Services to get in detail the process of a waiver application, because you would have to get that in order for this to be successful and to get the funding from the federal government. Fast forward, and now we're getting into November and December, and at that point, the Speaker's office agreed, okay, you can have two separate bills. And that was a big win, because what that did was it allowed the policy bill, AB 1400, to move forward with the majority vote, and it gave us more time to work on the funding mechanism and constitutional issues that would have to be placed before the voters. That didn't have a deadline to get through the assembly. And when I mentioned the deadline, since the bill was introduced last year, and it wasn't heard in the first year, it became what's called in our terminology a 2-year bill, which means that it has to get through the House of Origin, in this case the State Assembly, by January 31st of this year. And so it was good news, though, that it was separated out. I met with the chair of the Health Committee, had a really good conversation, just trying to get him to agree to hear the bill. Ultimately, when we introduced the separate mechanism for...
One of the big complaints on the Progressive Caucus call was that he was not coordinating with organizers on the ground. He was coordinating with the California Nurses Association, which did the majority of the organizing around this, right? And so he would have been doing that with their leadership. So that's another sort of smokescreen, that particular argument, because it's not up to him to have unique relationships with the organizers on the ground. But by pushing that argument forward, and then he can just be like, yeah, I should have done a better job. What they're doing is hiding the fact that the Progressive Caucus was not doing anything with the organizers on the ground, and that's actually what their role should have been. Their role should have been organizing and igniting all of the progressive clubs, groups throughout the state to actually make this happen. But they're very much incompetent people who do not plan, who are not ready for this, and they were not doing what needed to be done to actually lobby the politicians and make them know that they had the support to actually vote in favor of this, right? And so there's a lot of excuse stuff happening right now for this failure. Not only Ash giving excuses, but all of these other groups giving a ton of excuses. Like, what the fuck was Brianna Greyjoy doing to promote this? Was she promoting it before it failed? Does anybody have clips of her actually saying, hey, this is where you can get involved? This is where you can go out and like phone bank or, lobby your representatives? Was she actually doing that? Or is she just that Monday morning quarterback who comes in and says, yep, Democrats suck, right?
Funding. At that time, the bill was referred, AB 1400 was referred to the Health Committee. This is in mid-January. It's referred to the Health Committee. And other good news is the chair of the Health Committee, who previously had never expressed a position, said he would support the bill. And that makes a big difference when the chair gives a yes recommendation. And so we present the bill. We're able to get it through the Health Committee. Immediately has to go to the Appropriations Committee the next week. I meet immediately with the Appropriations Chair. At this time, when it gets to Health Committee, I set aside 20 plus hours to have one-on-one Zooms with my colleagues, because prior to that, the bill had never been heard in a policy committee. So for members that are not sitting on that policy committee, because there's a lot of 2-year bills. They're not going to presume that all of them are going to be coming before them on the floor. We didn't get as many questions. We didn't have as much dialogue, only because even though I'd reached out to folks, there wasn't as much interest in a bill that at that point hadn't been moving forward. And so the reason why I mentioned that is that essentially after Health Committee, we only had a couple weeks to try to convince a majority of the Assembly to get on board with AB 1400. You correctly point out that we do have a supermajority of Democrats. However, we did have 4 vacancies. So ordinarily we have 60 Democrats. We're down to 56. There are 19 Republicans and 1 independent who's essentially a Republican. He was a Republican. So that's 20 votes. They're not going to vote for it. We're down to 56 votes. And not everyone, unfortunately, campaigns in favor of single payer or is in favor of single payer in the legislature. And there are a number of folks that are very much, kind of corporate and, do the bidding of a lot of these corporations. Now, that being said,
you said that you believed that the bill would fail by double digits. That's more than just a few folks out of those. Can you name who you think would have ultimately killed the bill?
Well, this is where we were as we fast forward to the Monday where the bill is being heard. Because yes, I do believe that it would have.
Just a quick reminder: the on that progressive call, the Progressive Caucus call, Ron Placone was present. So it's very clear that they already had their feelers around this incident and they were ready to capitalize on it. Despite the fact that they generally don't get involved in this stuff at all. They're in their own world of hating Dems, but they don't actually help us try and advance any legislation whatsoever. They're always just promoting their own movement for the People's Party bullshit. And oftentimes their events are timed to disrupt progressive campaigns, such as Nina Turner's run for Congress. They did their dumbass marches with ignorant people who know nothing of Medicare for All. I guess there were marches and rallies, right? The March for Medicare for All, or March. Yeah, that's what it was called, I think. Was specifically timed to distract remote volunteers from phone banking for Nina on a very critical weekend before the special election. And also, I think they did have an event in Ohio, which would have actually distracted her ground volunteers too. Yeah, bad faith.
I think at worst, we probably would have gotten 28 votes. At best, I'm guessing 30 or 31 votes. So anywhere from 10 to 13 votes shy.
But here's the question that people want to know the answer to. We are now speculatively talking about how the vote would have gone down. If there had been a vote, it would be out of the realm of speculation, and people would have to defend the fact that they voted down this overwhelmingly popular proposal. So why not force the vote?
And that's what I want to get to. And so when it comes to Monday morning, and by the way, my staff, me and my staff, and the nurses are sharing the same Google Doc with the exact same vote count. We know where we are. We know we come to Monday, we're at 28 votes. And
you heard that, right? So the California Nurses Association does know which assembly members were not going to vote positively on this bill. He knows. But Amar somehow doesn't fucking know. Really? I'm baffled by this. How did the Progressive Caucus not have the same information? Why didn't they have access to the same Google Doc? If Ash Kalra was able to coordinate with a PAC on an issue, why wasn't Amar?
The reason why, we don't, it's not like a week before. We're using every day, talking to members, trying to get them on board. In the final 24 hours, what have you, there are folks that just aren't there yet because we're trying to get them there in a meeting with them, answering their questions. This is why I made the decision. And the nurses have the names as well. I mean, it's not, but this is the reason why I made the decision, and the reason why I believe it's important for us to continue to work to get folks into the SCOM. And so one of the reasons why is that next year we have the most vacancies we've had in 10 years. Out of those open seats, not all of them are in kind of progressive areas. Some of them are, it's going to probably be a Republican winning. Some of them are a little bit more purple areas. And so I think at the very worst, we're going to get 4 new members that are going to be very publicly for single payer, corporate free. I'm endorsing a lot of these candidates. At best 9, my guess it'll be between 4 and 6 members that will come in that will be more favorable next year. What that basically means is that we need 5 to 7 incumbents that are going to continue to be serving in the years ahead to come on board. And a lot of them we were having.
This question was asked on the Progressive Caucus call as well, was, okay, well, which candidates should we be supporting in order to get those, what was it, 5 to 6, 6 to 7 people, incumbents, but also he talks about new blood coming in, like so which campaigns are we supposed to be supporting? Like, he is not, the Progressive Caucus is not, and Brianna Greyjoy is not, and Ron Placone is not telling the progressive community the knowledge that they have, which is, how do we strategically lift up the right people into assembly to get this legislation? So they're basically just creating a lot of chaos and irritation and anger, but withholding the information needed to actually get it done. So nobody involved here is actually trying to get Medicare for all. They're just playing with your emotions.
Really good conversations with, but again, we ran out of runway. We ran out of time.
Well, help me to understand this, listener. I'm getting a little lost, and I'm sure the same is true of the listeners. There's 2 bills. There's the 2 prongs. It's the Medicare for all part, and then there's the financing part. The and please correct me if I'm mischaracterizing those parts.
Absolutely.
The Medicare for all part needs only a bare majority to pass.
That's right.
Correct? Okay.
The policy.
The policy part needs a bare majority. Yeah. And you're saying you need a 2/3 majority for the financing aspect. Can you remind me why it is that the financing part needs the 2/3 majority?
Good question. It's because...
Look at how fast she dropped. Look at how fast she dropped. Well, name names. She immediately transitions into a different topic. A topic, again, just burying people in details. Yes, please, Ash, bury us in more details that, go into the weeds. Don't give us the 10,000-foot high-level explanation that actually makes sense to give to an audience. Just bury us in details so that your audience doesn't really know what just happened. They are just getting the clues that they should be mad at the Democratic Party, right? Okay.
In order to put something on the ballot, you need to get a 2/3 vote of the legislature. And in this case, if we're able to do that, it only needs a majority vote at the ballot. And so that's the reason. That's just a policy that's been in place for a long time. Where in order to put it on the ballot, because of the
nature. So I'm sorry. So the policy part isn't on the ballot in the same way that the financing part is quote on the ballot?
No, and there's a reason for that. And this also has to do with the federal Medicare waiver. The reason why
Okay, I do have a question about holding the pen, Brianna. You're clearly not writing anything down. Are you a smoker? Is this like a nervous thing? Or are you pulling a Bob Dole and you're just like, you've been trained up to be like, I will look smart if I'm holding a pen in my hand.
With the Department of Health and Human Services, a couple of the key things they said is, in order for the governor to even apply for a federal Medicare waiver, you have to have legislative authority. And what that clearly means, and we asked all the very direct follow-up questions, is that you have to have a bill passed for the legislature. It has to have the policy. It does not have to have the funding mechanism. And the reason that kind of logically makes sense is the policy design speaks to not only how expensive it'll be and what the cost will be, the policy design also speaks to the Medicare waiver, and you'll know how much you're going to get from the federal government. And that'll better explain exactly how much you would need in taxation for the Delta in order to fund the system.
I think what might be helpful is to just take this moment to clarify what the Medicare waiver does, how the Medicare waiver
Yeah.
enables the California State Medicare for All program.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to shorten my intro when I was talking about going to DC, but this is a really important point.
Yeah.
Is that in order to get a single payer program in any state, you have to get a federal Medicare waivers. And there are in existence operating over half a dozen. They're not full single payer programs, but they're unique kind of targeted programs to expand healthcare. There are certain conditions under a Medicare waiver program under the Obama administration that are still in existence. They survived through Trump. The waiver program survived through Trump and is still in existence. And so it has to expand healthcare. It has to be at least budget neutral to the federal government. And so those are the two key factors that you can't be contracting. You can't be.
Okay, you can see her arm is stationary. She's not writing anything down, but she did look down at something. So she does have notes or a tablet or something that is prompting her how to conduct this interview. But that pen is all just, it's a prop. She's not taking notes. Look at her right arm and tell me when her arm is moving in such a way that it looks like she's actually taking notes.
Privatizing healthcare, because Trump tried to use the waiver program for that. It's got to be an expansion of services to the community, and it's got to be at least cost neutral to the federal government.
When we say Medicare waiver, I'm sorry to be so pedantic, but what do we mean by that?
So what we basically want to mean is that there's a number of federal programs and that bring federal money into the healthcare system. And in order to have a true single payer system, it can't be single payer plus Medi-Cal plus Medicare. It's got to be all the money has to come into one fund. In order to do that, you have to get permission from the federal government. Now, over 70% of our money into our healthcare system, right, in California alone, is already public money. It's state and federal funds. But if we don't get a Medicare waiver, it will be impossible to have a single payer system. And that's why it was really important for me to follow.
And tell me again how this is a more difficult process than legalizing weed has been. Somehow we've got states all over the place able to get into the weed industry, set up dispensaries. We're doing it all over the place. So help me understand, why is this more challenging to work within the parameters of what's been set up and actually get it done? I feel like this interview has been conducted in bad faith, that it doesn't, she doesn't even know the right questions to ask, because she's probably reading off of a talking point script of what she can specifically ask, and is not actually pushing hard on this scenario and saying, well, wait a minute, this really doesn't pass the smell test.
A timeline that works with the federal Medicare waiver process. And that's why, and that was part of how I was able to make my argument with the Speaker's office. Hey, this is why it makes sense to separate the two. And so it ended up being a good result in that regard in terms of separating the two. Now, at the end of the day, we still need, and this was actually harmful to us, when Governor Newsom distances himself from AB 1400 and single payer after campaigning on it. That really hurt, because I'm trying to get colleagues of mine to vote for it, and I have a whole timeline. First we have to get this bill through, then we ask for federal waiver. They're like, well, doesn't the governor have to sign the bill? I'm like, yes, but we will.
I'm starting to get the impression, by how much she's pushing this whole, I'm trying to get people to vote on it and so on and so forth, I'm starting to get the impression that it was actually very close to passing, and that this was all performative. That's in my humble opinion, that's where I'm starting to land on this. This is all smoke and mirrors. We were actually very close, and the folks who are asserting themselves as progressives are just gaslighting us. That's where I'm landing on this right now. I'm not going to do the whole thing, because I've already been doing commentary on it for almost 35 minutes. But this is some Hollywood bullshit, what we're seeing here. It's some Hollywood bullshit.